Hello everyone, can everyone hear me and see me? All right. Oh. Let's have a look. There we go. Okay, so yeah, I'm Bronte. I'm a master's student studying at the University of the Westfjords, which is all the way up in Isafjordur in the Westfjords of Iceland. But I'm here today thanks to Havro, who lent me the company car, and also thanks to my supervisor, Marianne, and the University of Iceland for providing the data that I used for my study. So I wanted to look at the acoustics or the noise from vessels. So to give a bit of background to what vessel noise actually is, there are three key components of vessel noise. There's the propeller cavitation, which is where as the propeller of the boat rotates, it creates a lot of bubbles. And as these bubbles compress and collapse in on themselves underneath the pressure of the water, they create this sort of popping noise. And over the course of the boat's transit, this creates a low-frequency drone. Then you've also got the flow noise of the water moving around the ship's hull. And then you've got any machinery vibrations, which are coming from the onboard machinery or engine that's vibrating through the hull into the surrounding water. And a lot of management bodies and monitoring networks have described vessel noise as a dominant source of anthropogenic noise pollution in the marine environment. As you can see from this graph, it's from 2019, looking at noise emissions from just the commercial shipping industry, and you can see how far-reaching it is and how much of the ocean it's covering and introducing noise. And this is only an increasing problem, especially with economic expansion and the globalization of shipping activity. But why is this important? Why is ship noise an issue? So marine soundscapes are incredibly important. So a lot of the species that we like whales, rely on marine soundscapes for all sorts of things. Acoustics are vital for communication between species, navigation, predator avoidance, hunting and foraging, even mate selection. But these anthropogenic activities, including shipping and other things, are introducing detrimental levels of noise, which are impacting these natural acoustic sounds, which are leading to all sorts of negative impacts on these species. For example, it can lead to the displacement or habitat avoidance of species in particularly noisy areas, or changes to their natural behavior. It can even mask important calls or communications between species, and that can have impacts on their mating success and finding conspecifics. And in the worst cases, it can even cause permanent or temporary hearing damage if they're particularly close to the anthropogenic noise source. And over time, these cumulative stresses can reduce their overall fitness and lead to chronic stress, which can have a population-wide effect in some cases. So for my thesis, I wanted to look a bit more at this vessel noise, specifically in the marine tourism sector, because it has such a prominence in the Icelandic economy, and also its proximity to acoustically sensitive species like whales. And that's also why I was looking at acoustic data from Husavik, because as we know, lots of whale watching activities, lots of marine tourism, and also lots of whales. So I was given a snapshot of data by Marianne, and I wanted to look at vessel noise from whale watching boats, or 3 small-scale vessels and 4 large-scale vessels in Skjálfandi Bay in July 2022. As you can see on the map, I hope we all know where Husavik is, but there it is. So for my thesis, I had a few main aims. I'm only covering one of the main topics for this presentation, because otherwise we'll be here for a lot longer. So I wanted to explore the sound levels from tourist vessels and explore and then compare these sound levels between the small-scale whale-watching vessels and the large-scale cruise ships, and then see if there was a significant difference in the sound pressure levels, which I'll explain a bit more in a second, between these 2 vessel categories across 4 specific frequency bandwidths, which again I'll explain in the methods. There goes a cruise ship. Excellent timing. So for the data gathering, I wasn't involved in this. This was all down to the Husavik Research Centre and the University of Iceland. So in July 2020, they set out a hydrophone. It was a bottom-mounted hydrophone, you can see in the diagram here. And you can see that little triangle on the map, that's where it was deployed, around 15 kilometers directly opposite the harbour here. There we go. And then I was given this snapshot of data for the tourist season in July, and then it had to go through sort of data filtering and sound analysis to kind of get the audio files from the hydrophone into some sort of measurable value. So first off, I filtered the acoustic data based off vessel times and dates that I knew specific whale watching or cruise ships that we were focused on were in the bay and operating at that time. And then I also focused the data on 4 specific frequency bandwidths, the 63, 125, 250, and 500 hertz bandwidths. Specifically these because they're relatively low and they're recognized as good bandwidths for monitoring vessel noise specifically. And then after some data processing, which was done with some help from Christian from Aarhus University, I then did some sound calculations on our studio, and that was sound pressure levels, which measures the intensity which measures the intensity of the acoustic signal within that given frequency. And then I took the root mean square of that to get some sort of mean measure for that sound level across those 4 specific frequency bandwidths. And here you can see the vessel distribution, and these are covering all the whale watching trips and the cruise ships that I looked at for the entirety of July 2022. So whale watching ships, you can see they covered a lot more distance, as obviously they're searching around looking for whales, whereas the cruise ships, they're just coming straight in and out. But for my actual results, so here you've got the sound levels for each specific whale watching boat, and there was no consistent trend in the sound pressure levels or the sound levels across the specific frequency bandwidths, and little variation between the vessels themselves in the noise they produced. And roughly it was about 162.1 to 143.6 decibels, and this is in relation to how noise is received underwater. So this isn't how we would hear it above on land, it's how it would be perceived underwater, so that's why it seems a bit high. And then these are the sound levels for the cruise ships. So again, there were no consistent trends in the sound levels across the frequency bandwidths, and there was little variation between the vessels themselves, and they ranged between 159.41 to 138.29 decibels. So what do these results mean? So I did some statistical tests in our studio. I did a Wilcoxon assigned rank test, which showed that there was no statistically significant difference in the sound levels between the 2 vessel types, so between the small-scale whale-watching boats and the large-scale cruise ships, with a p-value of less than 0.05. So, however, previous research has been able to show variation in sound levels between different types of boats, specifically large-scale boats, which often produce high-frequency noise, compared to large vessels, which typically produce lower-frequency noise. So, what does this mean in terms of further research? Why we saw these things could be because I wasn't looking at a large enough range of frequencies, because I was focused on the 4 specific ones which are really good for monitoring boat noise, but perhaps not good for picking out distinctions on types of specific boats. As you can see in these graphs here, especially figure 8, you've got large scale, small and medium vessels, and they're all producing sound levels that peak across a huge range of frequencies. And again, in figure 9, you've got all these different types of boats, tankers, cargoes, research tugs, and they're all peaking at different frequencies and covering quite a range. So it could be that we just need to expand the frequency ranges that we're looking at when we want to specifically look at boat noise in the area. It also there could be a number of factors influencing the sound levels of each boat. So the technical and operational features of a boat can impact the noise it produces quite a lot. So for example, in the graph here, you've got 3 categories of noise, which are just vessel-based categories. So you've got the propeller design, the hull design, and then onboard machinery. And you can see they're producing noises across various different frequency bands, and that's just 3 different categories. And then you've got all sorts of other things about the operational behavior of the boat that can impact the noise, so how fast they're going, what direction they're traveling. And then there's also the environmental factors, which can then influence how the underwater noise produced by the boat. So the weather conditions on the day, like wave characteristics, precipitation, can also influence how much sound is perceived. especially in Skjálfandi Bay. This came up in my defense, that there's a lot of seismic activity, which in itself produces low frequency noise. So that could be it biasing the sound levels that I was receiving. So to conclude it, yes, the vessels connected to marine tourism that I was looking at in Skjálfandi Bay produced underwater noise, but there was no significant variation in the sound levels between the vessel types, which was what I wanted to look at. And that's why we need further research into the extended frequency ranges and also looking at the different operational and behavioural and environmental components influencing the boat's noise. And with that, I think I'm going to end. Nice quick one. Thank you for listening. Okay, any questions?
Did you also look at the electric boats?
No, I didn't have those in my data set, but I think that would be very interesting to look at because you'd think they would be quieter, which would be nice. Yes?
Do you know the frequencies that the boats are they like recognised to be damaging to the whales?
So I did look at this in a bit more detail in my thesis, and there are some examples of where whale watching boats and cruise ships were producing similar levels of noise to what I was finding, but it was very difficult to see if there was any conclusive evidence of disturbance. I think there was one study, it was done in 2002, so a while ago, looking at the impacts of whale watching vessels on orca, and they managed to find all sorts of distances at which it's audible to orcas. So I think it was 16 kilometers, the boats were audible to the orcas, and around 15 kilometers it started masking the orcas' calls, and if they were within 200 meters it caused behavioral changes, and I think their study, it was only 3.1 to 15.37 decibels different to the sound levels I recorded. But again, these are quite different studies, so it's quite hard to draw comparisons. So it's quite difficult to know how much it's disturbing species. But there is quite a bit of evidence that underwater noise does cause some level of disturbance. Yeah.
And the rig boats, the speedboats?
Mm-hmm. What was the...
What about speedboats?
Speedboats, I didn't include those in my study, but it did come up in a few of the papers I read looking at whale watching and rib boats specifically, because they go quite fast, and the small boats, they typically produce high frequency noise, and that usually doesn't cover as big of a distance as the low frequency noise from big boats, but it also depends on how far they are away from an individual or a whale on how much disturbance it can cause. So it's kind of difficult to tell which is worse, or if they are worse. Yeah. I think. Good. Okay. Thank you.